From Xolelwa Kashe-Katiya. She is the project leader for the Indlulamithi Scenarios Trust. Xolelwa, good afternoon to you. I really do appreciate the time. There can be no doubt that we face a series of very serious crises. Is a national dialogue a good idea? Is it going to help us solve any of them?
Good afternoon, Stephen, and good afternoon to your viewers at home. And thank you for that question, and thanks for having us. And yes, I mean, we do have a crisis. Actually, it can be even defined as a polycrisis, because there's a convergence of many crises. We know from our previous research that we are currently in a state of lawlessness when we tracked the country's trajectory along the scenarios that we've written. So the conclusion was that we are in that state of lawlessness with many crises, including crime, including gender-based violence, corruption, and many others. So it is actually an opportune time to have a national dialogue. So it's a good thing to have. However, as indicated by your reporter, the previous speaker, that there are questions of legitimacy, there are questions of representation that still arise. However, it seems like the state-led intervention is still to appoint a steering committee that will drive the process. There could be questions around the location at the NEDLAC, because then representation once again becomes an issue when NEDLAC is concerned. Because, for example, you won't find the informal sector there, the unemployed youth are not sufficiently represented there. Civil society is not represented sufficiently at NEDLAC also. So those are the questions that arise. In terms of the eminent persons, and once again, I think I agree with the previous speaker that representation is an issue, and we need to have a closer look at that, because it feeds into the trust deficiency that already exists.
I mean, it's staggering to me, and this is the result of actually a bigger problem in our politics, that there's no one representing the unemployed. And that's because the unemployed, and I realize we can have a big argument about the definition of unemployed, and I accept that, but that's because for years and years and years, they've never had an organization to represent them. There's been an unemployed people's movement, but it's never really been able to sort of get a long list of members. And considering that there are at least 8 million, but probably 12 million people you could define as unemployed, and that means that their voice will not be heard in this. And I don't know if there's really a more important voice to hear from.
You're correct, Stephen. I mean, this is a very important voice, especially the unemployed young people. We know that young people are the majority of our society, and with this crisis of unemployment and the lack of absorption into workplaces, by young people, there's a better chance of someone who's over 35 years old to gain access to new job opportunities compared to young people. And I think the main problem there is how we've formed these arrangements in terms of who gets represented where. Because this dialogue is supposed to happen at NEDLAC as prescribed by the law, the NEDLAC Act, that they're supposed to actually drive dialogue, and ultimately with the view of achieving a social compact. However, if you look at the structures at NEDLAC, they require that you have a federation. And that's why even with labor movements, you would find federations such as COSATU being represented. In terms of business, it will be the big business is represented. So there isn't a mechanism to ensure that there's representation of sectors that are unable to organize in that manner. So it's not just the unemployed. I mean, there's the creative industries who are not organizing in that way. There's the textile industry, for example, it also operates on a level of informality. So how do they get their voices heard?
And Xolelwa, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we are going to run out of time in a moment. It seems to me that the dividing line in our politics at the moment is whether or not you believe in the Constitution, right? That's one of the dividing lines, at least. And I would suspect that this process will give space and perhaps legitimacy to people who do not agree in the Constitution, and people who actually don't want to be part of South Africa at all, whether they want an Afrikaans enclave, a Zulu kingdom, or even for the Western Cape to leave Mzansi. The point I'm making is, could this actually have some dangers for us?
It could potentially open up a conversation that is not anticipated, but perhaps it is a good thing to have that conversation, because we cannot be speaking only to those we agree with. So to have a dialogue like this, we have to be able to speak with those we don't necessarily agree with, so that we can get to a point where we can find each other. Because what we are lacking as a country is a common vision and, that North Star that guides us as a nation. So we need to slog these things out. We need to fight it out, debate until we get to a point where we find each other. And I think it's been too long that we've been avoiding these difficult conversations. And however, we still have to caution that they have to be managed in a proper manner, a manner that is also representative, especially of the most vulnerable groups.
Xolelwa, thank you very much indeed. It's going to be the most interesting process I can imagine. Xolelwa Kashe-Katiya is the project leader for the Indlulamithi Scenarios Trust.